Sidney Poitier spent a lifetime making dignity look effortless, so effortless that people forgot how hard the world made it. Lisa Marie Presley inherited a myth before she could choose one. Living inside a legend is its own kind of weight. Ray Stevenson showed up, did the work, commanded every frame, and somehow the industry never quite gave him the headline he earned. Whitney Houston's voice was so extraordinary it became a standard, and standards, once set, are merciless things to be measured against your whole life. Raquel Welch built a career in spite of an industry that kept trying to reduce her to a single image. The distance between the icon and the person was always the story. Shannon Doherty never stopped fighting, on set, in court, in hospitals. She was defined by resilience long before resilience became a brand. There is a version of Tom Hanks that almost everyone agrees on. Decent, reliable, the nicest man in Hollywood, the kind of actor who makes you feel, without quite knowing why, that everything is going to be all right. That version has been reproduced so many times, on magazine covers, in acceptance speeches, in late-night anecdotes about him tipping generously or remembering a crew member's name, that it has become something close to a public utility, a comfort object for a culture that doesn't have many left. But here is the problem with that image. It is doing a tremendous amount of work, and work, even the invisible kind, has a cost. Tom Hanks has won 2 consecutive Academy Awards for Best Actor, a feat matched in the entire history of the Oscars only by Spencer Tracy. He has starred in films that collectively earned billions of dollars at the worldwide box office. He has been cast again and again as the conscience of America, the soldier, the astronaut, the castaway, the widower, the idealist. And through all of it, he has maintained a public persona so consistently warm, so apparently effortless, that the performance itself has gone unremarked. No one talks about what it costs to be that. No one asks what gets compressed or redirected or quietly set aside to keep that image intact across 5 decades in one of the most psychologically brutal industries on Earth. This is the story behind the story. Not a scandal, not a takedown, something harder to resolve than either of those. A portrait of a man whose greatest achievement might be the distance between who he appears to be and what it actually takes to be him. Tom Hanks was born on July 9, 1956, in Concord, California. His parents divorced when he was 5. What followed was not a clean narrative of hardship overcome. It was something more disorienting than that. His father remarried multiple times. Tom moved between households, between step-parents, between versions of family that kept rearranging themselves. By his own account in interviews over the years, he was a fairly solitary kid who read a lot and felt most comfortable at a remove from the social machinery of childhood. He was not, in the language of Hollywood origin stories, discovered. He was not particularly pushed. He drifted, deliberately, quietly, toward theater at California State University, Sacramento, where he left before graduating to pursue an internship with the Great Lakes Theater Festival in Cleveland, Ohio. That decision, leaving school, moving to Ohio, betting on a craft rather than a credential, is easy to romanticize in retrospect. At the time, it was the kind of move that looks either brave or reckless, depending entirely on how it turns out. Hanks spent years in regional theatre, doing the unglamorous institutional work of learning how to inhabit other people in front of live audiences. It is the part of his biography that gets skipped in most retellings, because it doesn't have a clean climax. But it matters. It is where he developed something that would define his entire career: the ability to be completely present without appearing to try. His first marriage to Samantha Lewis in 1978 came early. They had 2 children, Colin and Elizabeth. The marriage ended in divorce in 1987. Hanks has been guarded about that period in ways that are conspicuous by their absence. He does not speak about it with the fluency he brings to nearly every other subject. That silence is its own kind of information. The television series Bosom Buddies, which ran from 1980 to 1982 and cast Hanks and Peter Scolari as men disguising themselves as women to afford cheap housing, did not make him a star. It made him visible. There is a difference. What it demonstrated, to anyone paying close enough attention, was an ease with physical comedy and an instinct for emotional sincerity that sit on opposite ends of a difficult spectrum. Most performers are good at one or the other. Hanks was already, even in a disposable sitcom, good at both simultaneously. Ron Howard cast him in Splash in 1984. The film was a hit, and then Hanks entered a period that his supporters tend to compress and his critics tend to use against him. A run of comedies: The Man with One Red Shoe, Volunteers, The Money Pit, Dragnet, that were not good. Some were genuinely bad. The decade that followed Splash was, commercially and critically, inconsistent in ways that should have produced more anxiety than they apparently did. Hanks kept working. He kept choosing projects. He got things wrong repeatedly. What is interesting about that period is not the failures themselves, but what they suggest about how he was being perceived by the industry versus how he was developing as an actor. Hollywood was trying to figure out what category he belonged to. Hanks, it seems, was not particularly interested in the category. He was interested in the work. Big, in 1988, changed the conversation. The film, about a 12-year-old boy trapped in an adult body, required Hanks to do something technically demanding that looks, on screen, like pure joy. To play childlike wonder without condescension, without winking at the audience, without ever breaking the spell of the premise. He received his first Academy Award nomination for that performance. The nomination announced something the industry had been slow to absorb. This was not a comedy actor who could occasionally be serious. This was a serious actor who happened to be genuinely funny. The marriage to Rita Wilson in 1988, the year Big was released, is the relationship that has defined much of the public version of Tom Hanks. Wilson, an actress in her own right, has been his partner in the most visible, most scrutinized, most consequential chapters of his life. Their relationship has been described, consistently and across decades, as a genuine partnership. Hanks speaks about Wilson with a specificity and directness that is notably different from his characteristic deflection on personal subjects. Whether that reflects the depth of the relationship or the discipline of someone who has learned exactly which parts of his private life to make available, or both, is impossible to say from the outside. Philadelphia, in 1993, was a pivot that could not have been predicted from his existing body of work. Hanks played Andrew Beckett, a gay lawyer dying of AIDS-related complications who sues his firm for wrongful termination. The role required him to appear visibly ill, to embody physical deterioration, to carry the moral and emotional weight of a story about discrimination and mortality without allowing the performance to become a demonstration of suffering. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor. In his acceptance speech, he named his high school drama teacher, Rawley Fulgham, and a friend, mentor, in terms that were openly and deliberately affirming at a moment when that required conscious choice. He was the biggest movie star in the world, standing at the most watched podium in Hollywood, and he used that moment to say something specific and real. Then, the following year, Forrest Gump. It is almost impossible to discuss Forrest Gump with any critical precision now, because the film has been absorbed so completely into American cultural shorthand that the performance inside it has become invisible. The running joke, the box of chocolates, the bench. People quote the film the way they quote weather, automatically, without thinking about where the words came from. But what Hanks actually did in that film was extraordinarily difficult. He played a man with a below-average IQ as a full human being, without pathos, without exploitation, without sentimentality that curdles into condescension. He played Forrest Gump as someone who deserves to be taken seriously. That is harder than it sounds, and he won his second consecutive Oscar for it. 2 consecutive Best Actor wins. Back-to-back. The last person to do it was Spencer Tracy in 1937 and 1938. The achievement is factual, and it is staggering, and it tends to get lost in the broader cultural conversation about Hanks because it happened during a period when he was so dominant that dominance itself felt unremarkable. Apollo 13 in 1995, Toy Story in 1995, Saving Private Ryan in 1998, You've Got Mail in 1998, The Green Mile in 1999, Castaway in 2000, Road to Perdition in 2002, Catch Me If You Can in 2002, The Terminal in 2004, Charlie Wilson's War in 2007, Captain Phillips in 2013, Bridge of Spies in 2015, Sully in 2016, The Post in 2017, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood in 2019. That is not a filmography. That is a record of a cultural negotiation conducted over 3 decades between an actor and a country about what it means to be a decent man under pressure. Nearly every major Tom Hanks role is a variant of the same essential question. What does a person of conscience do when the system around them is compromised, indifferent, or cruel? He plays that question with such consistency that it has come to feel like a natural extension of who he is. But an actor does not accidentally spend 30 years returning to the same moral terrain. That is a choice, a sustained, deliberate, career-defining choice, and choices like that have weight. The weight became briefly, starkly public in March 2020, when Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson were among the first prominent public figures to announce a positive COVID-19 diagnosis. They were in Australia, where Hanks was filming Baz Luhrmann's Elvis biopic. The announcement was characteristically direct, warm, and practical. A note about following guidelines, about taking it one step at a time. It was exactly the kind of communication you would expect from the version of Tom Hanks the world has constructed. And it almost certainly helped normalize early public understanding of the illness. The man and the image were, in that moment, indistinguishable. That is either beautiful or a little vertiginous, depending on your perspective. What the image does not easily accommodate is failure, doubt, or private cost. Hanks has spoken in various interviews about a chronic tendency toward anxiety on film sets, about the discipline required to sustain focus across long productions, about the physical demands of roles that required significant body changes, most dramatically in Castaway, where he lost approximately 50 pounds for the second half of the film, a process that required the production to shut down for over a year. He has spoken about the strange depersonalization of fame, the experience of being recognized everywhere as a character rather than a person. But he speaks about all of it with a lightness that functions as its own kind of armor. He is funny about the hard things. He is gracious about the frustrations. He has never, in public record, had a visible breakdown, a public feud, a collapsed project that became tabloid currency. That consistency is either a reflection of genuine equanimity or the most sustained act of image management in contemporary Hollywood. Possibly both. The two are not mutually exclusive. His production work, through Playtone, the company he co-founded with Gary Gertzman, has added another dimension to his career that rarely gets the attention it deserves. Band of Brothers, The Pacific, John Adams. Prestige television projects that collectively reshaped the form, that ran for years, that required enormous creative and organizational investment. Hanks did not simply lend his name, he was operationally central to those productions in ways that his performer's biography tends to obscure. The man who appears on screen in small, carefully chosen film roles is also, simultaneously, running a production apparatus that has employed hundreds of people and shaped the cultural record of American history on screen. He has written books, 2 collections of short fiction. He collects vintage typewriters, which is either a charming eccentricity or a very legible metaphor for a man who is interested in the mechanisms by which stories get told. He has been, by all public evidence, a genuinely engaged father to 4 children across 2 marriages. He has not, to any documented degree, been a difficult colleague, a volatile presence on set, or a person who reserves warmth for cameras only. And yet, the question that the image resists is the question that all images resist. What is it like to be him when nobody is watching? What happens in the gap between the person who walked onto a set in 1980 with no particular guarantee of anything and the person who has spent 40 years being the most trusted man in American cinema? What did that journey compress? What did it cost? We do not get to know. That is, possibly, the most interesting thing about Tom Hanks. In a culture that has progressively demanded access to everything, to the private lives of public people, to the unmediated self behind the performance, he has maintained a distinction between the public record and the private person that is so seamless it barely looks like effort. He is open. He is available. He gives long interviews. He makes himself present. He engages. And yet, the interior remains genuinely opaque, not hidden in a way that reads as concealment, but closed in a way that reads as dignity, maybe, or discipline, or both. Tom Hanks is still working. He played Geppetto in Robert Zemeckis' live-action Pinocchio in 2022. He played Colonel Tom Parker, the deeply complicated manager of Elvis Presley, in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis the same year, a performance that divided critics in interesting ways because it asked audiences to watch Hanks play someone manipulative, self-interested, and arguably parasitic, and not everyone was comfortable with it. That discomfort is itself a data point. The image is so powerful that when Hanks acts against it, audiences notice the friction. He is a man who has spent his professional life building something rare, sustained, genuine, earned trust on a massive scale. And the discipline required to do that, to maintain it through decades of scrutiny, through personal difficulty, through a culture that chews through its icons, is not nothing. It is, in fact, something close to extraordinary, just not in the way the comfortable, familiar version of the story usually describes. The world thinks it knows Tom Hanks, and maybe it does. Or maybe what it knows is the most carefully constructed, most lovingly maintained, most genuinely inhabited performance of his career. The one that never gets an Oscar nomination because it isn't filed under acting. It's filed under life.